And we're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Love First Christians weekly Bible study. Today, I've got Aaron with me, but Aaron is going to be just a few minutes. He is, as Ben says, the gamers put it, AFK. He will be returning in just a few here. And we're joined by Ben, who we had last week, and I'm super stoked. Decided to come back this week. We didn't scare him off just yet. Yeah, me too, man. Hey, it's I'm glad to have you here. So, let's go ahead and get started in it. We got quite a bit to cover, both in the Bible and current events and our personal lives and anything else we want to talk about here. I guess, Ben, since we're going to be missing Aaron for just a minute, let's go ahead and keep going with the conversation that you were just talking about. How I've noted that Christian churches should be like the safest place that you can go, right? It should be like, hey, we got traditionalist transsexual. Hey, it's been awesome to meet you, by the way. Thanks for showing up. We got Bray here who says, "What up, fam?" And as always, what up, Bray? It's good to see you too.
What's up, Bray?
So welcome everybody in here. To have the third highest rate of sexual assaults really bad, behind only the home and schools. And I think that it may even be worse than those just because you're not required to be at, church as you would be required to be at home or the schools. So the opportunities that they have are lesser. And so unfortunately, predators are really maximizing their time with these churches. I know you already detailed it for me a little bit, but what is going on that's I mean, it's a literal millennia old problem. What's going on?
It is, oh my word, it is so bad right now. The Catholics took their hit, and it's been traced back all the way to the 40s and 50s. So as far back as you can go, with documentation, the Catholic Church has had rampant sexual abuse. Well, and that's simple. Their theology's wrong. Their theology, they're forcing guys to unnaturally not be able to be married, which is obviously not God's design. There's going to be eunuchs, but I don't think every single Catholic priest is a good eunuch, obviously. Um, but when you get to uh, the evangelical churches, it's been their turn, and their turn has been going on for about the last decade. And I'm a part of I follow several different forums, and I do research on my own as well. The sexual abuse is seriously so bad. It's hard to wrap one's head around it. You've got it's literally daily, whether it's a pastor, a bus driver for a church, um, or a deacon or a worship leader. Um, there's just that the just recently the worship team for the Ark, Ken Ham's group, the one of the guys in that team got busted with, they said, just endless amounts of CSAM. It's not child porn, it's child sexual abuse material. It's CSAM. It's not child porn. There's no such thing as child porn. It's CSAM. And one of the things I was telling you, Hody, is Hody Johns. I love your I love it, dude. Is I firmly believe, and I've come to this is my personal views, but I've come to the conclusion the reason why sexual abuse is rampant with evangelical Christianity, it's simple. It's the core theology is wrong. It's a patriarchal, misogynistic based theology system, and women are just property. When women become property, then they become sexualized easily. And when they're sexualized, then they're going to be raped, and they're going to be molested, they're going to be abused, they're going to be taken advantage of. And purity culture puts most of the blame and most of the burden on women. And I remember recently I told somebody, I said a woman should be able to, teenage girl should be able to walk in the room. Obviously, this is wrong, but naked, and we should behave ourselves. We would do the right thing, and obviously there's something wrong. We would try to cover them up, whatever, but we wouldn't sexually objectify them. In other words, it's not the girl's fault. Um, I talked to a rape victim, And she kept saying, "It's my fault. I wore a nightgown. I was 12. I wore a nightgown and I tempted my uncle." No, you were a victim. It's not your fault. There's nothing you did that was your fault. Nothing. And so that's what we were talking about, is that the theology of evangelical Christianity, the core system, has permitted, even though they would deny this vehemently, is permitted and endorsed because of the way it's taught, where we are today, where sexual abuse is rampant.
Yeah, we've got a couple here. Kellyanne Murphy, who I know, I'm coming to know personally, and she's agreeing with your statements here. She's actually getting out of an abusive situation herself. She's just becoming public with a lot of what she's been through. And yeah, it's I'm glad that there are places that was still within the Christian movement that thankfully are these safe places, but
They're
they're rare and
they're
difficult.
rare.
Yeah.
As my
Yeah.
father used to say, they're rare as hen's teeth.
As a traditionalist says, Luther complained about it and insisted marriage would reduce the rate. Not a bad recommendation. Be in the world, not of the world. When you hold yourself not of the world, you tend to see or when you hold yourself not in the world, you see it as a plaything as opposed to your neighbors. You know, certainly something there. Bray notes, authority always attracts people who seek to abuse it. Doesn't matter if it's politics or the pulpit, unfortunately. He also
Hey,
said that.
can you leave those up? I'm trying to read them quick here.
Oh, sorry. Sure. So we got the thing about Luther. Did you get this one here? Complained about it.
Okay.
And
So
I'd
like to interject on the Luther thing.
Sure.
So I just recently got into an argument with mind-bogglingly avid Trump supporter who is also a staunch legalistic Christian. And I'm finding there's a lot of the two intertwined. And the discussion came up how the 50s and the 60s were so much better because women were stay at home, they were under control. And I said, well, let's actually discuss what really happened. What really happened is women were nothing but property, and marital rape was absolutely a pandemic issue during the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I think the 70s that marital rape was actually declared a problem,
Yeah.
and then the laws were set. But don't forget, a woman couldn't even sign her own checks all the way up to, was it 76 or whatever it was?
I think couldn't get a bank account until like the
Couldn't get-
80s.
Yeah,
like
it's insane
unbelievably late. Like
know,
whatever you think
we
it
keep
is in your
saying-
head, it's
we
later.
keep saying make America great again, and my
Yeah.
argument has been, tell me when we've been great. We've had moments of greatness, but we've never been great. And one reason we've never been great is because these legalistic religious systems have constantly tried to take over and create these monstrosity of problems.
Yeah. Anyway, the next comments, and they blend here. There's three of them here, but this is Bray. He says authority always attracts people who seek to abuse it. Doesn't matter if it's politics or the pulpit.
Yeah, 60% of clergy and 60% of law enforcement are the highest ratio of domestic violence.
Yeah, unbelievable. And then he and Kellyanne, Bray says, I blame myself for what happened to me for over a decade. The gaslighting was insane. Kelly says, same. And they're commiserating with each other. Sorry you went through it too. I'm glad you're able to break through the gaslighting, stop blaming their actions on yourself. And Kellyanne posts something that a square, probably some kind of emoji. I'm going to assume, let's say a heart, something that my computer doesn't want to pick up on there.
It's a heart. Heart.
Yeah, sure. It's tough knowing that this is a realization. When we talk about the plank within our own eye, here it is, right? Like we want to remove splinters from everybody else's. Oh, they're blue hearts. Cool. We need to start right here at home. We don't have to go outside in the world and force them to be good. We still got a lot of work to do to make us good.
What is the world has been my question, and I still don't get a good answer.
What is the world?
What is the world? Because all I see is all the problems are in the church.
Yeah. I truly, and this is something that I noted with the New Testament, Paul's not writing letters to Caesar asking him to be nicer, not writing letters to the warlords in Africa and India asking them to be nicer, not writing letters to the emperors and in China and Japan, asking them to be nicer to the missionaries. He's like, no, this is completely on you. You guys can be nicer. You guys can be more honest. I push you to be better and better and better. And that's the solution. And now we've got Aaron in the house. What's going on, Aaron?
Hey guys, I'm doing all right.
Any thoughts? We wanted to wait for you to discuss Bible stuff because I know you always have big important
list.
question, a list or whatever. But I think you heard what we were talking about here, but sexual abuse in the church. Any thoughts on that before we go to Bible stuff?
I wish I could say I had something profound to say. I was super fortunate to have never experienced anything like that personally, either directly to myself or anybody that I knew. The church that I grew up in was incredibly inoffensive, I guess, in the sense of like there was nothing interesting about it per se. Like it was just standard church.
That's good.
Like
well,
the
unfortunately,
expectation that you have of a church, not remarkable in a positive way either, just church.
I think the hard thing is when you look, it's easy to get disheartened about this. I think I was looking at a quote from John MacArthur this week that re-entered the news stories. He said this in like the 80s, but that hell would be full of people who admired the Sermon on the Mount, and reiterated it again somewhat recently or whatever. And within the context of his speech, there's a little bit to know. One is that like he's on one hand, he's trying to say we need to not just admire things, but fall in love with them. However, he is using the Sermon on the Mount as something that people like that. And so therefore, because they trust the salvation that, the path to salvation that Christ paints on the Sermon on the Mount, that like he's worried that would override people thinking that I must specifically pray to, white conservative Christian Jesus.
There's nothing like a Calvinist to wish everybody to hell. I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's bad. So anyway, I was looking at him and I was like, well, what's his like shtick? What's his deal? And I mean, the only way this guy is notorious outside of his own church is by, unfortunately, like creating a program that kept a lot of women not only in marriages where they were being abused, but where their children were being abused. I mean, sexually and physically, and all of them, right? Documented. They had somebody come in and was like, hey, you need to stop doing this. And then they had another person review that, and they not only kept doing it, but accelerated the amount that they were making this recommendation. You need to forgive this guy. You need to go back with him. You need to go back to that bad situation.
And they disciplined her.
Yeah. And she gets disciplined. Specifically, one of them got excommunicated. I mean, completely barred from the church. And it's hard to look around and see John MacArthur being very successful and this girl losing her support system and not think, well, is this Christianity? Because if it weren't Christianity, wouldn't they be kicking John MacArthur to the curb and completely rounding the wagons around this person here? Like, that's what you would think should happen. And if by their works ye shall know them, then people are right to leave the Christian faith if that is what the Christian faith has been to them. And I know that's a hard thing to say. I believe in my heart of hearts that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
Right. Like, but I would not ever subject somebody to those things if the people who act in Jesus' name do those things. I would sooner they leave completely and let's take Jesus up on his offer. He saved souls and that went to hell, that are in prison, all that after death. I'm fine with that, right? Like, let's rely on that Jesus to get them the help that they need later. But I'm not going to keep somebody in a bad situation now. Few comments here, and then I will turn to Ben. I can tell you something to say here, but imagine the distance it takes to use the Sermon on the Mount to condemn people who agree with it. Yeah. Kellyanne says it's still like that. And I was told by my husband's Christian mutuals to be more submissive, forgive, read The Power of a Praying Wife, blah, 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 and then I blame myself. And Bray says, I want to reiterate Galatians, a book that evangelicals have never read. There is no male or female in Christ. Yeah.
All right. Well, God is neither male nor female either. But that's all. Hey, I need to make sure I have full disclosure that I do have a bias on this topic of sexual abuse, because I was sexually abused by my Sunday school teacher, who eventually became my brother-in-law. So, and he was a missionary, now a retired missionary. So I do have a bias, and I've shared my story publicly on my personal page. I don't know. Is it okay if I mention it?
Yeah, please do.
Uh,
Please.
uh,
I've been following it. It's a good follow.
oh, okay. Rising from brokenness,
Yeah.
and my story is since I've shared it, I have had literally hundreds and hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, of sexual abuse survivors reach out to me. And every single one of these survivors, it was either a brother, a father, or a pastor or a worship leader or some person. They were authorities in the church. Every single one of them. The abuser was an authority in the church. And I'm talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And those are just the ones that have reached out to me. So.
Yeah. I know that there was a moment for me, and I think everybody maybe has had this at some point, where you start asking your female friends, coworkers, and males as well. I don't want to make this sound like an exclusively female thing. Obviously, when we talk about abuse of males, that's something that even gets documented in old school, Orthodox Judaism, right? Now they're keeping some of these, male altar boys around to keep themselves pure, of course, right? But yeah. I did share the name of it, but yeah, you can find it on, I believe, is it just a Facebook page, Rising from Brokenness?
Yes, I'm going to eventually start a YouTube page. I've got to start. I just haven't done anything with it yet.
That's okay. But Rising from Brokenness, Kellyanne says she's interested in reading it. And Becca, I was just about to bring you up as well. I'm so sorry, Ben. Thank you for sharing your story, providing community for other victims to share their stories. So Becca is somebody who's just gone public with her abuse. And this is somebody who is brilliant, has it together, successful. Like, there's this stereotype that you're some kind of mess up or something, or a feeling. I don't even say it's a stereotype. It's a feeling that we have, that we brought on ourselves because we see people who weren't abused and we just said, well, I did something wrong. Like, I didn't navigate as well as them. And the truth is, when you understand, I actually have pinned in the Love First Christians, Kellyanne has read Becca's story. Good. And you should. It's a good one. I shared it to my page. That cult mind control preys on people who are empathetic and intelligent and loving of other people and want to see solutions to a lot of the problems within our world and with ourselves, and people who are seeking those answers. If you were an honest seeker, you probably fell victim to it at some point, just because that's how it goes. And it's unfortunate because, they find themselves to these wolves in sheep's clothing, the verse that we actually covered this week in Mark. Everybody, thanks so much for sharing your stories. Obviously, I just wanted to start that for a little bit while we were waiting for Aaron to talk about the Bible verses. But if you have been abused, it is not your fault.
Absolutely.
You are 100% love. You deserve a place of safety within the Christian faith, and any failure to provide that reflects more on Christians than it does on Christ, than it does on yourself. You are not unlovable. You are not disgusting. You will, by escaping, because the way these predators work, escaping means losing your social status. It means tolerating abuse. I had, unfortunately, a friend subject Becca to some abuse for not, coming public earlier, leaving earlier, something. There is a great deal of shame, even in the mainstream from going through this and just becoming public. The media will tell you to keep quiet. Police will tell you to keep quiet. The church will tell you to keep quiet. Don't. And just be safe out there. If you have any questions, or you are wondering if something that you've suffered has been from abuse, we've helped a couple people in the Love First Christians recognize what was happening to them. So please feel free to join the Love First Christians, or reach out to any of us personally. I'm sure Ben, Aaron, or I would be 100% willing to talk with you and to try and help you out as best we can, or get you in touch with people who can help you out. Somehow we all ended up here to share and sympathize with each other. It's why I love this Lighthouse family. We love you too, Bray, Kellyanne, Becca, and transsexual, traditionalist transsexual. We love all of you. I appreciate you guys all joining in. All right, Aaron, what did you have with us for the Bible reading this week? Any discussions or questions that you had?
Yeah, so for my first one, I wish I had something profound to go along with it. But I wrote down, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. This is the section I wrote was from a larger section where Jesus and the disciples are observing people making their donations, and people with massive quantities of money are giving tiny amounts, but they're still relatively larger than a lot of other people because they have so much to give. And then this woman who's destitute drops 2 coins in, and Jesus comments that upon it. I usually with these kind of verses, I'm going to have something profound to say, like as part of it. The only thing that's really coming to mind is when our modern billionaires will give like this token tiny portion, and their followers will just aggrandize them so much for their charitability and how incredibly awesome that they are. And it's like a tenth of a tenth of a 10% of their wealth, and they're supposed to be just lionized for it. But yeah, I don't have anything profound to say on this one.
That's cool. I do. I think there's 3 3 ways to kind of look at this here. One is obviously God judges you not, he's working on a percentage and a curve as opposed to an overall stout volume. Anybody who is giving, when you see the poorest of the poor give a couple, share a couple dollars with their fellow poors. That's such an offensive term to call them poors, but the fellow, those who are in need, and when they do share those, it's just such you can feel the spirituality in it. Whereas when, a big corporation does it, it's kind of like, well, I feel the tax break from it. I'm sure there's a financial incentive. I see the PR angle from it, right? But not, not all that. But I actually have another angle here. And one is that she is actually functionally giving more. And this may seem like, what? How is 2 cents greater than $100? And I'll explain why. We have seen huge sums of money do absolutely nothing or get people trapped into, bad projects that ultimately end up going nowhere, projects that are designed to recycle and resend people down the same, we're told the Pharisees were good at making converts and then making them twice as fit for hell as they were themselves. That this is something that we can see these huge, massive sums and projects go forward. But when you give somebody just a couple of bucks and they can buy a sandwich, man, do they feel the love in that. Right. And it's not a multi-million-dollar project, but it is actually something that does go to something that's actually greater. And so when we have these small little, what we would call like pittances, I actually do believe these functionally go farther than all these billions and millions and quadrillion-dollar projects that Christians throughout the years have drummed up, and ultimately they didn't go anywhere. But the biggest changes that Christians have ever made was a couple dollars here and there, a couple of, shillings, here and there, whatever the coin may be.
About 2 years ago at this point, a little less than 2 years ago, about a year and a half, I was completely destitute. Like, I had gotten laid off. I had blown through all of my savings trying to find a job, and my unemployment had run out. And I was just asking for GoFundMe at that point because I was just like, I've got 2 kids. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I'm applying to probably 15, 20 jobs a day and not even hardly getting interviews. And I was just blown away by the amount of people willing to step in and help me out. Like, I figured I'd have maybe 10, 15 people that I knew personally who would toss like a 20 my way, which would help. I mean, for sure that helps, but like that's the extent of what I was expecting. And instead I had probably I want to say probably like over 100 people who gave me money. Hody, I'm almost certain you were one of them. Becca, I know, was one of them. And it got me through it. And man, I can't even begin to thank people enough for it. And I've tried to pass that on, in addition to just seeing the people I know personally, that mindset of like, oh, those 20 people who will definitely help me out, and trying to broaden my horizons more to the people who are, on the outskirts of my social circle that desperately need help too. Yeah.
Ben.
I just sitting here going, wow, I have a similar story. When I got COVID in October of 2020, I never recovered. And I watched my business, which was just almost at $1 million, go in a matter of a couple of years down to nothing, because I couldn't run it. And then my wife left me, and it was a bad situation. I was literally destitute, and it wasn't for people on Facebook. I would have had electricity turned off. I would have had gas turned off. I would have been on the street, and it was just these. I had the smallest amount given to me was 23 cents. And then the next day they asked for it back. It was so sweet. It was a homeless person, and I said absolutely. And I think I gave him $1 back. It's because I didn't have anything back to give. But it was people that I know didn't have money. In fact, one of the ladies who paid my electric bill for me one month, I know had fled like a year before from an abusive situation, was destitute, and it was GoFundMe's that got her going. And then a year later, she's paying my electric bill. So it's the people who have suffered and the people who have nothing are the ones that give the most.
There's a meme that goes around periodically, and it gets rephrased every once in a while, but it's the same basic concept of like, if you're in financial trouble and you've got a friend who has like $30 to their name, they'll buy your lunch. Whereas your rich friend, you go out with them and they Venmo request you for the cost of your soda or whatever.
Yeah.
Truth.
Kellyanne says that was me in December. No heat. I made it through from GoFundMe.
Yeah.
There's one more angle to this, especially in the biblical story, but it's still very much pertinent to what we're talking about now. How did that priest who donated all that money, where did that money that he got to give publicly, where did that come from? That came from all of those people who were giving their 2 bits, right? Like this came from people like, so, and again, we have these corporations today where they're like, look how much I gave. Well, no, people gave it to you, and listen, if you are, I don't want to criticize all big donations, but if you are being a good custodian, it's still not your money. It was money that you are a custodian of, and you're saying, I am choosing to actually invest this back into the community that has sponsored my business, right? That has helped me out, right? Like it's doing all these good things. I've been cutting all these funds, I've been making these profits and profits and profits, and I have yachts and yachts and houses and houses. Yeah, giving a little bit back is kind of the least you can do. And so it's the money's not yours even really to give, right? Like everything's God's, first of all, right? So giving it back to God is just a good minimum. But especially when you've been profiting and you live a nice, comfortable life, compared to everybody else, because of all the people who donated, to act like you're so wonderful and profitable. No, they're so wonderful and profitable. You just happen to be the one who got to be the face of it. Right. And that's public braggery as opposed to anything else. This question was asked to me, but I want to ask it to everybody here. What do you think the role of the church is in charity to local communities versus individual good works? And I'll say it like this. Now I have there is kind of I know what people mean when they say it, but I don't like the saying that organized religion is the root of all evil. I know what they mean. I understand that authoritarian, like organizational structure is like, as we talked about at the beginning with Ben, it can be bad and abusive.
Well, I say it this way: organized religion as we know it. is the
Yeah.
root of all evil.
Right.
Is currently evil.
But there's nothing wrong with organization, right? And so if
No.
we have a church that gets together, I can't build a house on my own, right?
No.
But me and 8 other people can build a house, right? And we can do that together. So that church in the local community, and I don't want to get this misconstrued at all, because this is the vision that I have for Christianity. We've been talking about this actually in Judaism as well. We've been talking about what was the role of the church: education, medicine, food, clothing, shelter, right? Those were the jobs given to the priests when they're taking care of people's spiritual needs. They are supposed to take care of those things for them as well. And so I see these groups as very critical and important to, when they are doing it right, obviously. Now, I don't want to say versus individual good works, because individual good works aren't ever going anywhere. We're called to give 10% of our money to, a church or something that is an organization that is doing the right thing. I believe since God's church, if you think it exists, then you should be tithing 10% to it. If you are kind of in a Protestant, or you think we're kind of in an apostasy phase or something like that, then, you're not obligated to give that to God's church, because God's church isn't around. But then in addition to that, you're called to give 10% of your own money to the less fortunate immigrants, right? You're supposed to leave 10% of your food at the side of your fields, right? Like to the strangers in your community. This is something you do on an individual level, right? Not on a community level. So it's both 10% of, what you're doing, and 10% of that. Now, I don't want to get fixated on the 10%. I don't think there's anything magical about it, but simply that we're saying I should be donating something to a good cause, group cause that can do more than what I can do. And also individually, I need to also be contributing towards a cause that is good, and I think, so I think both those things, I don't see them as any verses, but I think that they're both very important. Ben, I'll let you respond to this, because I believe I know your answer here. But do you
Well,
oppose attending local churches?
I want to answer. Now, I actually respectfully disagree. I believe the 10%
Sure.
is an Old Testament rule.
Mhm.
I don't believe that is a New Testament, New Covenant command. But
Fair enough.
obviously, we should give what we can. I mean, look, the widow's mite, it might not have been 10%. It might have been whatever she had, But when it comes to giving, remember the rich man. That's what comes to my mind. Where he said, go and sell all your, he said, I keep the 10 commandments. I mean, look at me. I am the specimen of perfection. I mean, I'm it. And God said, okay, go sell all your goods and feed the poor. And he went home crying with his tail between his legs, like a little, farm dog, because he couldn't do it. And it's not just an act. This is the conclusion that I have come to. I have to close my eyes because I battle cognitive from COVID. So if you see me close my eyes, because I'm trying to be able to do my wording.
We'll still be
It's-
here when you open.
it's not an act of 10% or whatever. It's a lifestyle. It's who we are. It's the fruit of the spirit. It's everything about us, but it also is done within discernment. Like, you don't hand $20 to the guy standing on the side of the street. For one, I mean, I have personally gone up to some of those guys and asked them, "Hey, what was your take this week today?" And they're like, I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And one guy, he said he averages about $500 a day is his average take. And so you got to use discernment, and so but what if you're not able to give? I mean, well, what if you're not able to give any money? That's fine. We're not under the Old Testament law anyway. But do something to help others. So for me, my personal Facebook page, where I've been sharing my journey, has been a method in my own personal life of giving. And I just had someone today, a survivor of an independent fundamental Baptist church, who's currently in the middle of a lawsuit suing a church. And I'm very proud of him for doing it. And he's holding his church accountable. And he's probably going to win. And he called and talked to me for about 30 minutes today. And he just needed some encouragement. And, and so that's a part of being there at whenever you can for others. I think that's
Yeah.
the key. So, then
To
the
be
question
clear,
about
I completely agree with you, Ben. Like,
okay.
when I mention the 10%, like the Old Testament is God's like, all right, you don't know how to be giving. Here's some concrete ways to do it. But ultimately, the goal is to get the spirit of giving, right? The
And
spirit of
then
generosity.
honestly, I don't know if did God give that or was that something that they came up with and said it was of God? Because
Possible?
I mean, look what the manuals they had come up with, and God mocked all of it. Jesus
Right.
mocked all of it. So I'm I'm the pessimist in this group. I mean, you actually got me to do something I haven't done in years, and I actually read my Bible this week. So
Nice.
without shaking, without literally, my PTSD has been so bad I've not been able to read the Bible.
Oh man.
My spiritual abuse is so extensive. Um, but so it was. I was excited. It was about 2 in the morning the other night, and I read for about an hour and a half, and really, I found myself enjoying it because I don't look at it now as necessarily the Word of God as much as I do as great works that God has given us to read and to learn from. And I'm growing. I know that my mind may change one day, but I'm getting there. At least I'm starting to read it again.
Yeah. I mean, uh, props to anybody who fights through it. Like, we've had this experience with somebody who was they were gay, right? And they were like, I just, even touching the Bible, I just feel like the hatred of
What
my
Christians have
pastors,
done.
priest friends, and
Yeah.
everything like that. And it's this person for some reason decided to stick with it and is joined the faith again. But I can't even believe the level of of faith that it would take to get there. Aaron, I do want you to answer this. I'm just going to go over a couple comments and then we'll
You want
go
me to
on
answer that question
to
about local
something
church real
else.
quick?
Oh, sure,
Oh,
yeah.
so the answer is the more I have, being disabled, I've had a lot of time to think. I do a lot of gaming on my Xbox, and a lot of times I'll turn the volume down, and constantly just process and think. Um, and I've come to the conclusion that I believe that the church as we know it as of right now is not the church that God designed. I believe churches are house to house, our home churches. I think this is church right now.
Hmm.
This is what church is. Or everyone says, "Well, I'm going to go to church." We turned it into something that it's not. We created these buildings that they're something they're not. So yeah, I don't believe in the local church in terms of all these different denominational buildings and entities. I do believe the local church is where two or three are gathered together in His name. There will He be with them. Also, that's the King James. I was growing up. I was raised in King James, so I memorized a lot of the King James. But even though
Totally
to
cool.
this day I can't read King James now, it's too triggering for me. I use the NLT. I started using it a few years ago when I could read a verse or two, and I have found the NLT is not triggering. I'm really discovering.
So as we're talking about the donation from this woman, as well as the further questions about tithing and everything like that, I got to thinking, and I don't know if this is a fully coherent thought. I'm still germinating on it a little bit, but how do you have the discernment to recognize when a recurring donation to an organization is continuing to have a positive effect versus bailing out of it too early because you got so cynical about organizations in general being disappointing that you end up not giving people the opportunity to grow, like the organization an opportunity to like weather a mistake.
I've got an answer.
Go ahead, Ben. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've got to that point of being cynical. So, I've looked at. I'm gonna give you the example of. I don't know if you have heard the story of Richard Wurmbrand. He wrote the book Tortured for Christ, and he created what was it, Martyrs? Oh, Voice of the Martyrs Ministries, and he started raising money to do things for people that were in countries that couldn't um to get them Bibles and things like that, smuggle Bibles to them. Like they were doing the balloons to float balloons into North Korea, secretly, things like that. Well, a lot of people don't realize is when he died, and then the one director got caught that he was molesting a little girl, and he committed suicide. So that's a typical story. So that has now been taken over by somebody, and it's now a multi-million-dollar business. And they built a multi-million-dollar building. Well, Richard Wurmbrand's son has publicly come out against that organization and said Voice of the Martyrs is no longer Voice of the Martyrs. It's nothing but a money-making business. So the conclusion, so you can't give to them based on their name, because the corruption. I mean, look at my father. My father ran this girls' home called Hepzibah House, and he traveled around the United States, and he would he would make these appeals for people to donate money. People donated, tens of thousands of dollars. The average he brought in around $200,000 to $300,000 a year in donations to run this girls' home. And the whole time, the girls were being abused physically and spiritually, and there was a lot of physical abuse. And it went on that way for decades. So for almost 50 years, the abuse went on.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I guess my real point with all of that though is what if you get to the point where you get so cynical that you can't trust anything, and you end up just not tithing in whatever
well, that's
form
where I want to head.
tithing. Oh yeah, whatever form
I
tithing
apologize.
takes
That's
here.
where I'm headed. So I just given a couple examples of you can't just give because someone's up there giving an emotional speech. So if an organization is truly being open and honest, they will have open, transparent books. You will know where every dime is going, and it'll be open. It'll be publicly on their website. You should be able to know everything about them. Like, I won't even give the Samaritan's Purse because I know that Franklin Graham is a multi-millionaire, and that they pay him a salary that's mind-boggling, and it shouldn't be that way. And so I won't give the Samaritan's Purse because of that, even though they do a lot of good things, because I cannot be a part of something like that. And they are not transparent with their books either. So that's
Yeah.
where my conclusion. They have to be transparent with their books. And if they are, then I will willingly give to an organization that has got a specific need for a specific reason, and then exactly where the money's going.
That's fair. Yeah, I think to Aaron to say how I would answer that question, I think it's all in the works, and it's not just the works when we're done or when we have the funding, it's the works up to that point. There is nobody who I have known who is stingy with $1 that all of a sudden becomes really giving with $100, right? Like these places that pretend to help, that are, when they're small, and they just think, well, if we get more and more, then we'll do the right thing. And we see this with politics all the time. People assume, oh, well, if only he gets the presidency, then he's finally going to be able to do all those good things. Like, he's actually a good guy. He's just forced to be a bad guy for now, right? And like, it's always worked the other way. Nobody's become a better person once they take that seat of power. It's always been the wrong way.
I'm sorry, I gotta push back a little bit more on this, because I feel like both of y'all aren't quite getting to where I was trying to take it, which is that, like, I'm going to use an example of something that I donate to on a regular basis. For years now, even when I was going through my really tough time, I still kept up my donation to the Innocence Project. I think I get like $10 a month to them, for instance. Okay. But let's say, 2 months from now or something like that, a story comes out that says that, like, some VP in the Innocence Project, or some sort of person in their Innocence Project was embezzling money, and they caught them. They're going to jail, or whatever. Kind of ironic given the company, or given the organization, but
Sure.
But I guess my question is, like, does that action from that individual negate the importance of the movement that you're doing? And the Innocence Project is just an example, but, like, and if you get too cynical about the sorts of things, and you can't trust that any organization can do good, then you end up just kind of turtling up and not actually engaging with the world.
Yeah. I think I got a good answer for this. It's not a matter about being perfect, but like of perfecting. And in the situation you described, I would say that is, we identified a problem, we fixed it, we clamped it, we're public about it, we're honest about it,
Yeah.
we're making it up to you, we're committing to a different course of action going forward. Really good example. I love the primitive church, but it is run by human beings, right? Like it after Jesus ascended into heaven was led by fallen mortal people. And this becomes very clear very early on in Acts when they're giving money collectively, and somehow the Messianic Jews were not given as much as some of the other organizations. And that's a really serious scandal, right? Like they donated their money. They have people who are hurting. In fact, those Jews ended up having to like leave Israel because of how hostile things had got there. They needed money for relocation costs. And so what they did is they identified the problem. They said, here's our commitment to fix it. And tell you what, we're going to add a couple of your people on our board that like distributes these funds to make sure that that kind of stuff doesn't happen to you and your people ever again. I'm not demanding perfection. I could easily see somebody being like, oh, they did that. Oh, I'm out of here. They're evil, right?
Right.
But they were, I think transparency has been said.
Yeah, I was
huge.
going to say that was the part that Ben
Transparency,
said that it resonated the most.
accountability,
Yeah.
and responsible, right? Like just saying I am responsible for making myself better. I'll let Ben get the final word on this one. I did want to point to some stories here. Bray says the church should be a lot of individuals doing their own work who come together to work for the community. It's almost exactly the opposite, but that's what it should be. Then he says, I have a manager who wears a cross every day, and she gave me a verbal for giving a homeless guy $3, and he spent it in our store because it encourages them to come back. Okay, I'll give him $3 more and we'll go into our drawer again. WTF. Yeah, I don't. I have had that experience with restaurants before where I'm just like, yeah, I paid for the guy's meal, let him come in and eat. And it's like, well, then I'll come back in tomorrow. Okay. Then he comes back in tomorrow. You'll live. I believe Jesus fulfills the law, freeing us from ceremonial law relating to the temple. That is true. But I think there is still a moral law, also true, which is to love others and to love God, which leads to the 10 Commandments. Yeah. Yep. No,
Absolutely.
There. I think in my experience, my church is very transparent with members about finances and spend much of it on local community projects like giving food to the poor. It kind of depends on size, pastor, and present, and denomination. Totally true. I work at it's called the Jesus Saves shelter in Ogden, and they're unbelievable, right? Like it is very, like Ben said, public with the donations. I mean, really, all the food goes in. We ask for donations in food, money if it must be, but we try to deal with actual goods at all possible. I don't run the thing. I'm simply a worker, right? Like I just volunteer there, but they're unbelievable, right? And so there are places like this. It's unfortunate that your experience is not the common experience, right? Like I want everybody to have that good experience. And unfortunately, a lot of these predators prey on that because they say, oh, you've had a good experience. Look, here's another opportunity to do another good experience. And then you find out it's just a big scheme to get more money. I was looking into the televangelists and megachurch preachers, and almost all of them have made millions while bankrupting like 4 or 5 churches. Like they'll be worth like $80 million and have the total cost
Every
of
one of them.
the debt of their churches like $300 million. Like
turning
unbelievable.
churches into golden parachutes is wild.
It's wild. And sticking them with the bill. Like horrible stuff, but like this is like unfortunately becoming more and more common, especially as the more we try to consolidate Christianity. It sounds like that you have kind of like something that's like an offbeat. I'm not beholden to any corrupt bishop or anything like that. I have a group of people who believe in it, and that's what we're doing, and that's my experience as well.
Along with what you're saying, look at Daystar currently. I don't know if you've found. Oh my gosh, it just keeps getting worse.
They are one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that they can be so anti like LGBTQ, and like every person who has led Daystar sermons has somehow been an LGBTQ individual. They're just very closeted about it. No, it's unbelievable how hypocritical they are. Ben, anything you want to say? Follow that, and then Aaron, we can keep going with the Bible here.
No,
Yeah.
I think we've done a good job discussing that.
So
Agreed.
yeah, I've got two quick ones. Firstly, as we were reading the Old Testament today, specifically Numbers, a couple of minor things that don't really necessary to discuss, but I just noted Numbers is a lot more narrative based than I remembered. I seem to remember it just being lists of numbers, like lists of family lineages and stuff like that, with absolutely no story whatsoever. And actually, there's a decent amount of story. We're continuing along the. I keep commenting this over and over, and Hodie's probably just tired of me saying it at this point because it's like so repetitive. But how ridiculous the Israelite people were to Moses and God. Like, at this point, he's saved them so many times. Like, in their lifetime, he saved them dozens and dozens of times. And yet they still persist in complaining and complaining and complaining about how Moses and God led them out into the desert to die. And it, like, I wrote this down, this specific verse that I have. I don't remember what chapter it is, but it's Moses heard all the families standing in the doorways of their tents whining, and the Lord became extremely angry. Moses was also very aggravated, it's funny because a couple of weeks ago, I think at this point, like it's been like 3 weeks, I commented how funny it was that Jesus got aggravated with his disciples when they were whining like that, and how Moses never lost his patience. And here we see Moses losing his patience because it's just absurd. Like at one point, Moses has to almost physically intercede between himself and his people from God, because God's just ready, okay, I don't care what promises I made, I'm ready to smite them all. And because it's so silly. Like at one point he gets so frustrated with the Israelites complaining that he lights part of the camps on fire and kills a whole bunch of them. Another point, a faction of the Levites rebel, and he just opens the earth and just yeets them out of existence, and still they're back the next day complaining again. And I'm like, he sends multiple plagues. This is all just in Numbers. This is not going back to Exodus or anything like that. It's just every single day. It's like a cycle of they complain, they get smited, and then the next day they wake up and complain again. It's like, come on, guys.
Moses is like, please, God,
yes,
can you just kill
he
me, man?
He literally says that. He's like,
right,
if this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me of this misery.
It's bad. It's hard to see, and I think it's hard to almost relate to, because it does come off as comical almost, right?
Yeah.
But there is I think all of us, if we're honest with ourselves, have an inkling, a desire for our old pre-Christian lives. I would say. I think all of us have. I think if we didn't have that inkling, God would just descend us, because there'd be nothing tempting anymore, right? God would be like, oh, you've defeated all temptations, I ascend you into heaven, there's no more battles for you on this earth, right? Just a basic example that I think a lot of people could relate to. I'm aware that rampant sex is not good for me, but is there a part of me, and I don't do it because I'm disciplined, but is there a part of me that's if I wasn't a Christian, would I engage in some rampant sex? Yes, I would, right? It is and I'm not saying that there's anything against, I'm not a purity culture Christian guy, right? Just to be very clear, but I'm just talking about meaningless, sex, and I think sex has meaning. I just think that's part of it. I think there's deep connections there, and so I think that that's a tempting thing. Another good one, I know I'm not supposed to engage in laziness. But man, if God was like, hey, I don't really care about that anymore, be as lazy as you want, I would bottom out. right? Like I'm not going to the gym anymore. I'm not going to my job anymore. Like I'm not making efforts to do stuff like this anymore. They're good for me. Like these things are, I am supposed to eventually get to a cycle where I say I work out because it's good for me. It makes me happy. That's the positive cycle, right? But I admit that I'm like not quite there yet. And there's a lot of stuff when I look at the Israelites, and I can understand why, yes, it was slavery, but your food was taken care of. You had like apparently some diverse dishes. You got meat, as Bray mentioned. Like we
Yeah.
get a lot of good meat back in Egypt. Our homes were paid for. This is a lot of responsibility. When I talk to rabbis about the 40 years in the desert experience, this is a good story about the difficulty of being a slave and then becoming free immediately. And we see a lot of this in America as well, with people who are freed, but it's not like we helped them integrate into a free society. And so, of course, did they make mistakes? Yeah. How can you not? Right? Like, slavery isn't a matter of running away, right? Like predators and stuff don't keep you, well, some of them do, but most of them don't like keep you chained to a desk like in their basement, right? Like you're allowed to be free, but the way they control you is like mentally, right? And they make you addicted to a certain life and feel like it'll be impossible for you to get away from it. So these are slaves who have just been freed, and they are understanding freedom for the first time. And it's understandable to say, in fact, I still hear Christians say all the time that they don't want our free will anymore. They don't want that responsibility, that burden, that task, that difficulty. I wish God would just, Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve are so evil in the Garden of Eden for breaking it. To think I could have had no will at all and just done good and just not had any choice to do evil, and that would have been so much better. And that's not God's plan for us. But I do understand where it comes from. I'm trying to relate to him a little bit. Aaron, what you're saying is absolutely valid. This comes off as comical. And I think that that's part of the point of it, is to see it through God's eyes and be like, oh my gosh, you're killing me right now.
Well, and you bring up meat, and like the fact that they, at least in Egypt, the Israelites had meat. And that's one of the stories from today, from this reading this week, is God doing the, okay, well, if you're gonna smoke, you're gonna smoke the whole pack. And he just jams like so much meat in their mouth that they gag on it, essentially.
They stop wanting it ever again.
Yeah.
Ben, your thoughts about this passage?
So I'm new to the group, so you're kind of picking up. I've got some. I'm getting there, but I'm very honest and open about it. But my question is it's so comical. How much? And hear me out. It's so comical. Obviously, this is written by Moses or whoever. How do we know he didn't embellish, for one? And one of the things that I just can't wrap my head around as I read the Old Testament is how human life had no meaning. It was just constant. Just, oh, well, there goes another 250. Bye. See you. We're going to burn you to death. And the rest of them, we're just going to swallow up, Korah and his family and his women and his children and these babies and the pregnant women. They're all going to get swallowed up in the earth. I mean, how do we know that really, truly happened?
Before you answer, Hody. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And so these are it's so comical, and it's so, I mean, honestly, if the Old Testament is real, then God's a narcissist, in my opinion. Because, I mean, if all of it is real. And so I'm trying to, in my own heart, I'm like, okay, God, this is what I'm going to tell you guys what I've asked God. I said, God, please help me understand. Because, see, that message of Korah, that story message, I'm heading somewhere with that. That story of Korah, I heard preached as sermons many a time to remind everybody to not rebel or question God's man. The man of God, his word is final, and you better obey the man of God. And so the man of God is me, and I said, thou shalt blah blah blah, and you better obey me, or God's going to judge you. And he might not swallow you up in the ground, but you're going to get a car accident this week, and that's probably because God's judging you. And so I've seen these passages used by more than one pastor as a means to control and manipulate others, which is again very narcissistic. Which I honestly hate the word narcissist, but it's the coin word right now, but it's overused. But I hope I'm making sense. I mean, the story is always just, I grew up. You made a comment, Hody, that sometimes you wish you'd go back to your pre-Christian life. Well, see, I grew up in a Christian home where, I had the snot beat out of me every day, and they were called spankings. I had a bloody bottom daily. And oftentimes my mother, for example, she would quote Bible verses as she beat me. So I grew up and we were told that the spankings were God's command and the bruising was God's command. And it was okay to be bruised because they had to beat the sin out of me and break my will. And so I grew up petrified of God, scared to death of God. And it's when I left Christianity, evangelical Christianity, is that I quit being afraid of God. And now I want to know God. I want to be his child. I want to know more. I want to become one with God. But I had to leave it to actually want it back, because I have grown, I grew up in the Baptist world, and I spent majority of my life scared, pardon my language, but shitless of God. I don't know how else to put it. So I guess I'm adding a different take here and not trying to be devil's advocate. This is just my heart, where I'm at and in my struggle. So
Yeah, and
Cody, I hope I haven't gone too far with what I said there, but
no, not at all. You said specifically that like Moses wrote the what is the Talmud, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. Yeah, that's right.
Torah.
Whatever. Yeah. But the phrase that got me tonight was now Moses was very humble, more humble than any other person on earth. And I wrote Moses is the author.
the guy that had a violent temper.
It's maybe a little comical there. Yeah. No, and portions, the more you say by rabbis, they think some of it may have been written by Samuel. Yeah. So there's not there's not a single consensus on this. Ben, you may be chastised by certain Christian groups for saying, like, I don't really recognize this scripture as canon. That will not be this group, and I can explain why pretty easily, because Jesus says so. Like, there's parts of the scriptures where he says, you've heard it said, but I tell you this.
Exactly.
And this contradicts that, right? And then there's like a good example here is when they talk about the any cause divorce. And they're like, well, we were told by Moses we could divorce our wives for any reason. God's like, and Jesus says, you know why God allowed that? Because your hearts were so hard, you wouldn't tolerate any other way, right? Like, you're just going to leave the faith, and then you wouldn't have the faith. So we're literally told that's a bad commandment by Jesus within the gospel that was given to people just to appease them.
Very good point.
Right. So, and then, and this goes further and further. Jesus says, I have so many more truths to reveal to you, but they're not going to fit in this book, right? Like I give you the Holy Spirit to help guide you through this. We've talked about this with slavery. You're allowed to own them, but as property. Now that's progressive in the Old Testament, very regressive by current standards, right? But what is God's church always doing? It's taking you where you're at and pulling you further in the right direction, right? And so there are parts in this that you might just say, I don't like this, and I'm not feeling the Spirit in this. Toss it out. I think it was Alan Watts who said, I think the Bible should be like ceremonially and like reverently burned once a year, to just be like, hey, I've committed it to my heart. I've got the idea, right? I've got the purpose. What is the purpose of the faith? What do literally all the law and the prophets, hang on here. Well, I cut you guys off. There we go. And I'm sharing the wrong one there. Here we go. Share this tab instead, right? Like, what do all the law and the prophets hang on here? Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So that if you've got something that you believe is a law in the Bible, this is the way Jesus did it too, right? Whether it was washing the hands or healing on the Sabbath or not stoning the woman as is commanded by Old Testament law, right? Jesus didn't say, well, that law was good. Now let me explain my twist on the law. He just tossed it out. He just tossed it out. And had no problem being like, nope. Why?
Very just matter of fact.
Yeah. Jesus didn't say, Aaron, you brought up last week, maybe the week before, but the spitting in the eyes, but that's a direct contradiction to Old Testament law. And Jesus could have just cured him, but he's like, nah, I'm going to spit in their eyes, to literally spit on the law. I am spitting on the law. Now, the spirit of the law is what matters, and what traditionalist transsexuals kind of saying here, I agree with. So it's being missed is the attempt to redeem original sin by God through discipline of the Old Testament. The New Testament, he gives us Christ to redeem us, because there's no other way this would work. Right. The Old Testament is kind of parody to try and show what it looks like when mankind tries to make the necessary sacrifices to atone for our sins. It's lunacy. It's ridiculous. It's impossible to do, right? Like, we already, I don't know if you guys have noticed this through our readings, have already had verses that say this is a permanent law that will be from generation to generation, no changing. And those laws have already been changed.
Yep.
Already. We are 25% of the way through the Old Testament, and we already have laws that say this will never change. It's a permanent whatever, never being allowed to change, and it's changed already. We've already overridden it. What matters? I'm going to give one final example to indicate how important this is. In Samuel and Chronicles, there's a census, and in one, God tells David to do the census, and another, Satan is the one who tells David to do the census. Those can't both be right. My apologies to those who say the Bible is the exact word of God and it's inerrant and all that stuff. Sorry. We have literally the same story, and one of these two is doing it. Now, what do we do then? Or when he says no one has seen the Father, right? These are all examples that we say. Now, here's the thing. You can say the Bible contradicts itself and allow that to make you hate the Gospels. To me, this unlocked my love of the Gospels, very similar to what you went through, Ben. My understanding that this was human beings' interaction with God, no different than my interaction with God. How much more powerful then is your personal testimony with God, right? To say that that is Scripture. You're not held back by a Bible. You're unleashed by the Bible. The Bible is telling you it is a work made by man that's doing its best to convey an omnipotent, all-loving, omniscient God. But we can't really do that. We're trying our best here. All that we can do is go on that journey with the Holy Spirit, right? And so we give you that Holy Spirit. And so if there's something going forward, this is the big thing in the widening of God's mercy, right? Undisputed best New Testament scholar, unfortunately just passed away recently, but I used to say alive, as well as probably disputed his son, but one of the best Old Testament scholars on the planet, wrote The Widening of God's Mercy. And these are the kind of stories that they share, that there is blatant widening of God's mercy within the Bible. How much more then? Jesus tells you to be aware of it today. Right. So even if you think the Bible's still homophobic, even after the New Testament, is it still homophobic? Right. What is the spirit of those laws? What are the works? What are the effects? Right. When you pray about it and you say, man, this guy really seems to love his husband and he's raised two good kids. Should I keep with the Old Testament law? Should I stone him to death? Should I keep with maybe New Testament law and maybe, well, it was never New Testament law and I could go into that, but let's say, shun him or something like that, or cast him out of the family. I don't know. What are the results of that? What are the fruit of that? What is the fruit of the Spirit when you do that versus the fruit of the Spirit when you accept him as a loving man of God? And one is indisputably better at producing fruits of the Spirit. Indisputably. And so I know I'm not trying to make this intentionally about a big LGBTQ thing. I just think that's an easy example that we have of laws that have changed. We are never explicitly told to stop mixing fabrics in the Bible, but we don't. When you pray about it, does it seem very important to you? No, it's not important to anybody, right? We've tossed it out. When did we toss it out? Never officially, but in our hearts, right? The Holy Spirit tells us this. Trust in the Holy Spirit. Your testimony is the gospel. It is as important as the scriptures. I love the Bible. Man, this is my bread and butter stuff right here. I used to be a very black and white person about it too.
Yeah,
But
me
it
too.
was my choice was to either pretend these contradictions don't exist and then lie about the Bible and try to twist it into something that it's not. Well, that's not what somebody does when they love the Bible. What somebody who loves the Bible does is understands why those contradictions exist, explains and navigates those paradoxes, and grasps why we are where we are and what its purpose was in getting us there. It's a useful tool, right? Like, it's so helpful if we treat it that way. But when we wield it as a weapon instead of a tool, we really are letting the gospel down, like, by a lot. I just talked a lot, but this is kind of a subject I have some very strong feelings about here. Bray says, I feel like the OT exists as a contrast to the gospel to show God's own word and how horribly we can botch it when we try to speak for God. Yeah.
That's the conclusion I've come to, is that the Old Testament is, I mean, literally, almost the entire Old Testament is nothing but man screwing up, trying to make it work to become perfect for God. And Jesus said, okay, enough. Let me just, and that it's finished. And when he said it's finished, he says, I'm done with all the games, all your works, all the stuff you do, none of it. It's over. And that's why they hated his guts.
Ben, did you have anything from the Bible readings this week that you wanted to talk about?
The Korah one was actually what we talked about.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was actually the one.
Yeah, God swallowing up old Korah. I had a friend in high school whose band name was Sons of Korah. They were a Christian group. Kind of cute. We'll find out about the Sons of Korah later. Aaron, anything
I just wanted to throw one more thing.
Yeah.
What is your takeaway from Peter's denial story, where Jesus tells him that he'll deny Peter will deny Jesus 3 times before the sun rises, or the rooster crows twice, or whatever? What is the meaning behind that?
I think it's hubris, right? Like, we think we're immune. I would never deny it. And we probably actually really feel that way. Peter undergoes like one of the coolest humbling experiences throughout the Gospels. David says, I've done wrong by sleeping with another man's wife. I can only rectify this by murdering. God, what? What? Yeah. What's that now? I completely lost
No, it was worth it. No, it was about Peter's
yeah.
in hubris.
So Peter is like, he's got some authority, and like, God's like, I'm gonna build my church on you, right? And like, hey, you're zealous, right? You're a rock, you're a stone. This is where I want it all to come from. But that Peter gets called Satan by Jesus. Jesus is extra brutal to Peter because of this, right? Like, he's got these high expectations. And the issue is Peter is riding high, pretending like he can never fail again. And Jesus is like, man, something that I have learned from psychology, these aren't even Christian books. These are like the Lucifer effect and stuff, is that the people who believe they are most immune to being manipulated are the people who are the easiest to manipulate. And this was true. You guys have probably heard, is it the Milgram experiments where they shocked people or pretended to shock them, right? Milgram experiments. Who failed it? Well, almost everybody, first of all, which should be a lesson to all of us, that we would all somehow do the wrong thing in the right situation, right? Or the right thing in the wrong situation, the wrong thing in a bad situation, I guess. That we are all capable of this. The people who were closest to succeeding weren't the people who were like, you can't manipulate me, I don't know nothing. There were people who were deeply aware that they could be manipulated, and they were alert for those things, and they were aware of when people were trying to manipulate them. And so they said, oh, I'm feeling that pull of manipulation again. What is it? Oh, that's what it is. They've had this happen to them before. And Peter is on this phase where he's just like, nothing is gonna shake me. I will kill a guy for you. I'll cut off a guy's ear for you, or whatever. But then he gets in this situation he's not prepared for, right? He's getting surrounded by people and they say, "Oh yeah, you were with this Jesus guy, right?" And all of a sudden he gets a weird vibe about things. And he's like, they might kill me. They might kill my family who's here. They might have a riot. I might be detracting from this Christ and it's his moment. Like, I'm just trying to be a background guy here. And he never saw in himself that he could do this. When we believe we are immune to evils, we are more likely to commit them. The people who don't cheat on their spouses aren't people who are like, nothing could ever tempt me. They're being like, oh, here's some things that could tempt me, and let me go ahead and work on those things so that so that I won't do that anymore, right? Or so that I'm aware of those signs and I get the tools that I need to combat them. That's how I take it anyway. Ben, as you, of course, right as you take a drink, I'm going to call on you. No, what do you think of the story?
Well, what you just said, Jesus said, "Take heed that Remember, he warned. I was thinking of the apostle, take heed that you could fall too." Yeah. So which one? I'm sorry, my brain I was so busy listening to you, I just kind of lost track.
Oh, this is in regards to the Peter story of Peter saying he'd never denied Jesus, and Jesus saying, "Before the rooster crows twice, you'll have denied me 3 times."
Ironically, my dad used to call me Peter, and my dad used Bible names to tell me how he felt to me about that. He called me an Esau when I rebelled, or the prodigal son, and then he'd call me a Peter because I always have my foot in my mouth, because I've always been a very outspoken individual. So I looked at Peter. I guess again, I'm coming from a perspective where I'm in my deconstructing stage, starting to reconstruct, and it's so interesting some of the things you're saying, Hody. I'm sitting here just going, wow, that's so good, because I'm going from where I was taught that the Bible is black and white. I grew up in a black and white world, and the inerrancy of the Scripture, to now I understand that it's not inerrant, and that is literally the moment I began to understand that the Bible is not inerrant, my whole view of God changed for the better. It just it's like, oh my word, God, this makes so much sense. How did I never see this? I'm 47. How have I never seen this in my entire life? And it's just been life changing. And this is in the last 3 months of my life. And I feel like a sponge right now as I'm starting to realize, wow, this is so cool. But with Peter denying Jesus 3 times, I mean, how many times have I denied Jesus? But I know him as child. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
And by the time, I mean, he's got to go through this. He's got to go through the whole kosher law thing, the whole thinking that the Jews are still the chosen people thing. And it's great because by the time we actually get to first, second, third Peter, he's humbled himself. And those are some of my favorite writings in the Bible, because he's experienced. This is somebody who has had to be humiliated, and I mean literally in a way that creates humility, right? This is something I've had to go through in my life. I thought I was never going to get divorced, and I know everything about marriage, and people should be asking me advice about everything. And then she left me and I screwed up, right? Whole world fell apart after that. And I had to eat it. And I'm a much more compassionate person since then. And without that experience, I would be just as prideful as I would before. I just wouldn't call it pride. I wouldn't know.
I guess as y'all were talking, something that jumped out to me was that, I kept wrestling in my mind. We brought it up a couple of times now in the Bible study, is the idea of lying for good. There's no Jews in this house, to the Nazi officer pounding on your door or whatever. And I was thinking in my head, Peter denying Christ to these people who are coming to potentially mob him is not doing Jesus any disfavors. There's not. And so I was thinking in my head, what about that aspect of the fact that Peter's denying Jesus, but it's not like blasphemy or anything like that. It's literally just I'm saving my skin, and it would do me. Go ahead.
I'd say you're exactly correct. I'm just sitting here going, wow, you're
yeah, but but that doesn't negate the point that Hody was making, of the sense of like, even though the lie didn't hurt or help Jesus at all, it was irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. It still put that method of introspection in Peter's mind, which was still useful, and is still useful as a lesson that's being taught today about the nature of being having hubris, and feeling like you're not susceptible to influence and stuff like that. All of those lessons can still be learned, while the actual meat of the issue is ultimately irrelevant, in the sense of like the lie not actually changing, Jesus' standing. It'd be different if like Peter was brought up to the stand to testify against Jesus or whatever, and started giving false witness or something like that, as opposed to like just, hey, are you with Jesus's crew so we can kill you for no reason? No, I'm not. Okay, well, bye then. Like it didn't matter.
You're exactly right. If he'd have said, "Oh yes, I'm of Jesus," man, he'd have been dead.
Yeah.
There's a couple here, and we got a pretty big current event story to talk about that I'm sure will take us a little bit. But one that I wanted to get to in the Bible is God mandating time off. I talked about this a little bit in the Discord this week, but I think it's a big one in the Old Testament, and I think it's very important. That if we don't have time off, I'm going to show a little something here. Let me make sure I don't cut you guys off this time. Ooh, that is difficult to read. Let me go ahead and zoom in on the part that I really want to focus on here. And this is the bite model. I hate that look at that banner. That's terrible. I'm going to go ahead and hide this real quick, but there's part here that says deprive you of 7 to 9 hours of sleep out at night. Exploit you financially, restrict your leisure times and activities. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that because that just looks ugly that was even worse. There we go. All right. So here is the thing about falling into a cult is they will take advantage of your sleep schedule a lot and take advantage of the time you have off. And it doesn't feel that way, but they'll just be like, oh, when do you actually have time? Oh, cool. How about, hey, you work a long day. That's cool. We'll be here at midnight. Right. And then from midnight to 1 p.m., 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., you can hang out with us. Right. And then you can go to bed. Right. Like cutting into time that you would need for sleep. But because you're a nice person, you are like, yeah, I guess I'll sacrifice a little bit of sleep to hang out with you guys. Well, you are not making your best decisions when you are tired. Something that is just psychologically true when we talk about willpower is it's really a function of energy in addition to grit and desire. And once you have not the energy, that's not a matter of you not wanting to do it, right?
You'll eventually succumb.
You will succumb. The brain requires energy. Every time you say no to a temptation, your brain expends and I'm talking about literal energy. Like even if you don't believe like spiritual whatever energy, you spend literal energy to say no to something. And so if you are just surrounded by cigarettes all day as a smoker, you're going to give in much faster than if you're offered one cigarette, especially if you're offered one cigarette at the beginning of the day. No big deal. I just got a fresh night's sleep. I've got plenty of energy. I'm able to say no. What's the cigarette that gets you? After the end of a whole day, after you're tired, after you've been working. So God has mandated, and I'm noting this, but like as a matter of hours, days, weeks, and a year even of rest, but to make sure that you are getting in those days, hey, when you're working, make sure that you get that hour off of work to relax, to recuperate. I'm not trying to break you here. A whole day of rest, right? In the Sabbath, I want to make sure you're taking at least one day off. You're not even supposed to cook and clean, right? Like doing nothing, downtime and rest. This is not just, and of course it's to think about God as well, but that's only in the context that it provides rest. The last word we actually get in the Old Testament, something that gets abandoned by the time we get to Christ time. People aren't even supposed to leave their houses on the Sabbath, right? Like God wants people to have that kind of downtime. It's not even like go to church downtime, like actual, real, total downtime. Weeks off during the year, making sure that he's like, hey, if you've been working so many months straight, you need to get a week off, recoup, reinvest with your family, remember where you came from. And then, of course, with Jubilee, an entire year off, right? And making sure at least we get every 50 years, nobody's working. Nobody's tending the fields. He even says, trust me. Like, I know you're going to want to like retill the fields or something like, no, I'll take care of it. You take a whole year doing absolutely nothing. This is something that I do feel we don't think is spiritual a lot, but I do believe it is. That we need to be able to have that energy, have those breaks, and then we will be in a real relationship with God as opposed to in a cult relationship with people who say they are from God. By having that energy, we're able to discern good from evil a lot better, and we have more willpower. And we beat ourselves up for sinning a lot. We just say, I keep sinning. I don't know why. I keep sinning. I don't know why. I can't tell you how many times it's just been exhaustion. Like, that's the key of it, is I am busy. I am working all the time. Pornography is all I have time for. I don't have time for like real sexual development with my spouse because I'm exhausted. I'm beaten down over here, right? Like, I've been a bad husband. Why are you a bad husband? Because I'm exhausted. I'm working. I'm trying to clean. I've been a bad wife. Why? I'm exhausted. I'm cleaning the house. I'm making sure the kids' needs are taken care of. I don't have a second to myself, right? Like, I'm waking up constantly. Exhaustion, exhaustion, exhaustion. And God is telling us from the ground of the faith up, that you are required to have breaks in order to be a good practicing participant in the faith. Anyhow, that's something that I thought was very interesting. Any thoughts that you guys have about that before we hop over to current events?
I just want to add that you're correct. I'm open about my story. I'm a recovering porn addict, and I've always had chronic illness my whole life. And one of my coping mechanisms for my childhood trauma before I started working on it was to be a workaholic. And so I was constantly triggering my health issues, chronic nerve pain, chronic asthma, chronic bowel issues. So I was bedridden all the time. So you're constantly exhausted. You're never resting. And so my willpower to actually even resist the pornography, I didn't have the strength to even try to resist because there was just no strength left. It's ironic that what happened is when COVID took my health completely and I was bedridden for 2 years. For 2 years I was bedridden. It changed my life. I went to therapy, and I've been in therapy twice a week for 3.5 years now, and it's changed my life. I left church and I quit, because at church I had to be up with, they had to, do whatever the preacher said. I had to be all the work groups and the maintenance groups, or what, going door to door knocking and all these church activities. I literally was running on nothing, and I was drinking nonstop caffeine just to keep going. And I burned my body out. And that's one reason why I think I got so sick from COVID, because I had nothing left. I had no immune system. I had nothing. And, I'm disabled now, but yet I'm in a better position, better place mentally than I've ever been in my entire life. It's crazy because I get more. I mean, ironically, one of the side effects of COVID, long COVID that I have, is I battle insomnia, and sometimes I can go for 3 to 4 days without sleep. And I will tell you that I literally am like slurs. I'm like I'm drunk, and it's horrible. And even powerful meds that they used to knock me out won't knock me out. I just cannot sleep, and so I can tell you it's not fun not having rest. So I just a personal experience what you were saying. So you're 100% accurate. Just from my own life, I can say I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, Aaron.
I don't have anything to add on that one, really. I agreed with everything you said.
Cool.
Yep.
Cool. Traditionalist transsexual wants to add one thing back to the Peter talk. I think, in my view, renouncing Christ for myself, I feel like I'm denouncing the concept of morality altogether. It effectively grants permissibility to the person who harms you when you deny Christ. Yeah, I wouldn't say denying Christ is like helpful or anything that would be like good. I just think it's something that we should be understanding of. I think is kind of more where we're coming from it there. But I see what you mean. I mean, I believe the Holy Spirit should push you. I think if you feel that we were talking about how like you don't say, hey, there's Jews in my house, right? Like to the Nazis. But I do think there's a time the Holy Spirit will tell you to tell an uncomfortable truth, and this is the right moment for it, right? And so I think that I would never, I don't want to sit around encouraging people to deny Christ. I would want to say we should understand the people who do, and that they might not be bad people. They might just be like, I mean, especially Peter at this time goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. Exhausted, right? Tired.
Scared.
Yeah. Scared. Yeah. I love your leading with the Holy Spirit mentality. Really emphasize love for God. Hey, we're the Love First Christians. I feel the Holy Spirit is part of the Godhead. I wouldn't say it's like the most important part, but if it's a third of the Godhead, we treat it more like a fifth of the Godhead, and we really needed to give it a bigger slice of the pie. Bray says, in my faith, you're supposed to rest anytime you have to light the hearth to see, along with the Sabbath. One branch of the faith even had a system where family members could take 3 months to 3 years off work for bereavement, depending on how close the relative was, and all of your expenses were paid by the temple. Yeah, these are really. How many times, I mean, you hear Ben's story, and how many times the church says, hey, what can I do for you? And the church needs to be able to hear people's stories. And instead of being like, this guy's schedule's almost jam-packed, where can we make him work? And instead be like, the way you are going to be the best member is if we do some work for you, right? Like, can we mow your lawn, right? Like, can we help out somehow? Because that's going to make you a better member to us. Too often we see people who are already strung out, the candles burning at both ends, but they want to do something. And we say, all right, we'll put you to work if you want to work. But the best thing that we can get them to do is take it easy, get people healthy. All right, Aaron, both you and I wanted to talk about this. And Ben, if you had a current event you wanted to talk to, obviously you're welcome to do that as well, or to recommend something. Aaron, why don't you introduce us to the topic?
Okay. Which one are we?
Yeah.
Because I brought up two that I wanted to talk about.
Oh, right. Well, so I feel like we'll save the Canada one because I feel like it's simple. War is bad. War with Canada is bad. Okay. But maybe let's start with the other one.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, back last year, there was a tremendous amount of protests on the Columbia University as a result of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And there were some protests that got fairly heated. Like you have Jewish students who were unable to get to class because some of the protesters were physically preventing them from being able to travel. And you also had Zionist protesters, some of which were Jewish, who would attack the protesters. So there was violence on both sides, but there was a lot of violence for those protests. And just recently, last week, Trump's immigration has basically disappeared this guy that's on screen. His name is Mahmoud Khalil, and for a good 36 hours after he was snatched, his wife, who was 8 months pregnant, and his lawyers had absolutely no idea where he was. Like they were being told that he was at one facility. They show up to go to the facility to visit him, and he's not there. And they just would not say what he had done as far as a crime. And they said that he was at a facility and he just wasn't there. So like he was gone. And now since that initial time period has come out, the government has officially come out and said, yeah, no, he didn't commit a crime, but we're going to revoke his visa, we're going to revoke his green card, and we're going to deport him. And the reason why is because he supports Hamas, which is not cited. Like, there's no evidence granted as to his supposed support of Hamas. It was literally just he wants the genocide to be over. He's participating in organizing the campus protests to end the genocide. And so, I found it extraordinarily disappointing that so many civil rights groups and so many, like the Libertarian Party, for instance, like the Libertarian Party National. I've been watching their Twitter for the last week, or for the last 4 days now. There's been not a single post about it other than a LP National retweeting a Dave Smith post where he was like obliquely referring to it. Like he didn't actually use Mahmoud's name. He didn't talk about it specifically. He just kind of referenced like a left-wing protest, and they retweeted that. But that's been the only acknowledgement on their part that any of this is happening. And to me, this is like one of the biggest free speech issues of our generation. Oh, they've got something now. Okay. As of today, this morning. Okay, great.
Saw it just earlier before it came on, but yeah.
Yeah, I checked this morning probably around 8 a.m. because I've been checking every single day to see if the previous day they said something. But yeah, so it looks like they finally got something out.
It's all good. It is obviously a little late, especially as a political entity, and but anyway, regardless, my feelings on this are it's getting bad. Okay, so here's just kind of some interesting tidbits about this. Guy was detained without charges. Obviously, that's bad. Done through ICE, which is a product of the State Department. However, it's not the State Department that revokes green cards; it's the NHS. And so this was just legally proceeding. This was an illegal kidnapping and detainment. And the judges recognized that, right? And they tried to ship him out, as you noticed, Aaron, very quietly, gets all the way to the facility before a judge is like, what? None of this is legal, right? Yeah. And so now he's hanging out in Indiana. They want to try him somewhere else where it's more, it's going to be easier to deport him by their like state laws or something like that. Issue that I have here is the reason for detaining him and deporting him has been changing. At first, it was what Trump said was that he put out a pro-Hamas flyer, which he never did. There's some rumors that maybe a pro-Hamas flyer like went around at an event he was at, but they were unable to produce it. And that was the initial reason given, right? And so they've been unable to produce this flyer that supposedly he made that praises Hamas. They said it was for anti-Semitism. They've since changed that, but he has specifically said there's no room for anti-Semitism in our movement. So it's not, as you mentioned, he has worked with anti-Zionist Jews for these rallies, right? Like this is,
he's like, okay, so I just from personal experience, as somebody who has been very, very vocally protesting the genocide in Gaza for a year and a half now, or however long since it started, like my goodness, it's been like 2.5 years now at this point. October 7th was 2023, so yeah, it's almost been I guess that's been a year and a half. Okay, I'm off track. I have said some things in my Facebook history and stuff like that absolutely could paint me as an anti-Semite. If somebody wanted to have that like that bent and they wanted to go through my tweets and posts and everything on Facebook to paint me that way, they absolutely could. And the fact that they have not been able to do it to this guy, despite how incredibly active he's been as an activist, is wild. That means that he's literally been squeaky clean to the point of absurdity. Because I certainly haven't been like dotting my I's and crossing my T's to erase my digital footprint or maintain it, like curate it so much that I could never be construed in any sort of way. Like this guy is pretty much the perfect activist, like enacting positive change while not allowing himself to succumb to the rage of the situation and posting things that could be misconstrued. It's just, it's wild to me how like disciplined he is. He never lets something his emotions get caught up and post something that would be that the conservatives could use as like rage bait.
Yeah, there's so finally what they ended on after changing why he was deported like 100 times. They ended with supporting protests that would be in line with like Hamas's values.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the problem with that. And the right wing should be very sympathetic to this, because this is exactly what happened when you promoted COVID vaccine hesitancy, right? Back in the days, is that, oh, if you promote something, even if it's true, you promoted something that made people hesitant to get the vaccine. Therefore, your free speech is gone, right? Like we're deleting your posts in this case. And thankfully, even with those people, we didn't detain them.
Right.
Most of the time they just got their posts deleted on social media, right? And so that is an issue. But also, listen, think about this. You're going to have values that are going to be also in line with bad people. I am anti-war. Russia is huge on anti-war rallies. They sponsor many of them, right? Like they are massive on sponsoring anti-war rallies. They try to get their own people and assets involved in speaking at anti-war rallies. So it is important to like kind of have a knowledge when like we have like when we might incidentally appear on the same side, even though we're not on the same side. But like, here's the thing: like, does Hamas wants a lot of bad things, but do they want Palestine to be free? Yes, they do. Okay, so all of a sudden, me saying that is literally a reason for them to deport me now, because I am supporting something that is in line with a value that Hamas also shares, right? Now, if this guy were out here talking about beheading people, I would still be upset that we're like just going to disappear him and not charge him and everything like that, right? Like, bad. But at least I would be able to look at the behavior and been like, that, you shouldn't be cool with beheading people. And I mean, I've even had some friends, Aaron's, we've even talked to them together, that feel they can defend the October 7th, events, right? Like people that are like, yeah, well, I'm fine if this is what it takes to be free, then I am pro Hamas and pro hurting and killing people, right? And I support their right to that speech. I hope that they don't truly believe it, and I would try to persuade them otherwise. But that's a whole separate conversation. This is not somebody who's supporting terrorism. This is somebody who's supporting, or who's, I guess, against the genocide happening in Palestine, willing to call it out and organizing rallies. And they are deeming fit to detain him and try to deport him literally just on free speech.
This is wild to me, and it just continues to show how incompetent the Trump administration is. Because if they truly wanted to start doing something like this, there are no doubt immigrants that they could target that would be far less sympathetic and would never have raised this level of furor. But the fact that they chose somebody who's, like I said, extremely squeaky clean. Like he doesn't even have he doesn't have Facebook. Because if you know for a fact that if he had bad Facebook posts or bad Twitter posts, the right wing found it. Yeah, the right wing would have been sharing that stuff like wildfire to justify his capture and detainment and everything like that. But they don't. They don't have anything, nothing of substance. Because there's nothing, presumably because there's nothing to find. Like this guy is extraordinarily disciplined. So
Ben, your thoughts.
Yeah, so evangelical Christians, which they proclaim, I mean, evangelical Christianity is why Trump is now in office. I mean, that's just fact. I mean, the numbers are there. But evangelical Christians have this, as far as I can remember, and probably way before me, is pray for the peace of Israel, and they wear their Israeli flags on their lapels, and so they're pro-Israel to the point where they're okay with the genocide, but they won't call it genocide. They call it self-defense. And they completely ignore the humanity of 2 million people that are literally being erased from humanity. And that's where it goes back to the Old Testament. And I've even heard something that, well, God let the Jews eliminate entire towns and cities. So why can't oh, my daughter? Why can't I'm gonna have to go.
You
Why can't the Jews do it now? And I publicly posted on my personal Facebook page, and this is before I even knew who this guy is. And he is Muhammad Kali he is absolutely a political prisoner. There's no other way to put it. Hey, sweetheart, give me 1 second, okay? Just stay on. He's absolutely a political prisoner. But I posted on my page last year that what Israel was doing was genocide and mass murder, and and any Christian who backs them is completely opposite of who God is. And man, did I take heat from Christians. I have been called anti Jew and anti-Semitic, and how can I talk that way? And it's to the point where if you defend anybody who Israel is attacking, then you're anti-Semitic, which I'm not. I mean, what happened to the Jews on October 7th was horrendous, and it was evil. The enemy is Hamas. Hamas is the enemy, and the Palestinian people are not Hamas, and they're victims of Hamas just as well. So it's okay to just kill tens of thousands of people just to get to the enemy you want to get to. And
Well,
so yeah, I think there's a Christian element here that's justifying this and allowing this, and that's why they see what Trump's doing as no problem at all.
Yeah. Ben, I know you got to go, but thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, guys, I apologize. My daughter calls every night, and I need to make sure I take this call. So
take it.
See you
Sounds
guys.
good, man. We'll see you next
Yeah.
week.
Bye.
Bye.
So I know you said it's simplistic, and I agree that it's simplistic. I don't know what we can really say about this topic, but are we going to go to war with Canada?
Yeah, let's move over to that one.
Like actually military involvement with Canada?
Yeah. I hope not. Now, I don't have time to read all this, but I will
Yeah.
say there's a breakdown here of stuff that Trump has said that is either or said or done that have been like acts of war / trying to commit acts of war with Canada. And it's honestly, I believed going into today that he had said a couple of things. I knew about the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
And I knew he'd talk about the 51st state before, but I just thought it was like typical buffoonery from him. This has been a pattern of like attempting war with Canada and escalating and escalating and escalating for it's been hot. Now you can see here like the timeline that I've got going on here kind of like talks about this trade agreement that we have. Trump negotiated, signed the document, celebrating it as the greatest trade agreement in history, 2018. So no problems. Then we hit November 29th, 2024. That's just like 4 months ago. And since then, it's been
pedal to the metal.
Pedal to the metal. Like if you wanted to go to war with somebody, this is what you would do, right? Like this is how you would escalate everything to the point where you're going to physical war with somebody.
I absolutely despise Trudeau. Like there's so many reasons to despise him.
Yeah.
But the press conference that he just put out like 2 days ago, where he's talking about the fact that Canada having to issue retaliatory tariffs, and he's like, I don't understand why this is happening. Like American people, please, like wake up and resist this. And like Trump, what are you doing? Like, is like generally negative opinions as I have of Trudeau, and there's a lot of reasons to have negative opinions of Trudeau. Like he actually seems like he is personally grieving the loss of a friendship between the two nations. And that really affected me. Like, this is completely out of nowhere. Canada is probably our biggest ally. What is, like, I don't understand the purpose of this. Not the Trump rhetoric. I understand the Trump rhetoric is basically has nothing to do with what Trump actually thinks. Trump just says things to placate his base and stuff like that. What is Trump's actual goal with destroying our relationship with our biggest ally? And like combining that with the pro-Putin aspect of his Ukrainian behavior, it almost seems like he's deliberately sabotaging the country. And that sounds insane to say, but like I'm trying to think of a way, like, what would you do different if you wanted to subtly destroy America? Uh, like, completely turn it over to an oligarchy.
I mean, these are like, I mean, bring it back to the Bible, wars and rumors of wars, right? Like this is the bad people we're supposed to be watching for, the people who both commit wars and the people who are like constantly talking about committing wars. And this is yet another one. And this is not, you may believe politically like that it's expedient to like carry a big stick to try and like weasel favors from people. First of all, that's not really how foreign policy functions. But even if you did, it's not Christian. It's antichrist, right? Like just very specifically. But when I look at this just from a practical lens, like it's just so all of it is just, I don't know why you would do it. As you mentioned, Aaron, like it seems absurd. Canada has joined us in like immoral wars, but like they'll be our ally, right? Like no threats or anything. They're just like, yep, we'll join in. Like we're part
Canada
of
is
that.
America's little
And, like,
brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they really have done like whatever. I when I was in Washington, had a friend who just was on the other side of the border, and we drove through all the time, and there was the only border security was a sign that said, well, hey, you're in Canada now. Like we're just like, oh, okay, we drive back and forth all the time, and we had fun, and we're World of Warcraft buddies, to let you know how old this was. But I guess that's still around, but I haven't played for a very long time. But he was a friend, and it was cool. And now we just it feels like things are escalating, and like talks of like another northern border and like the 51st state business. Part of me thinks it's like there's no way it can be serious, because first of all, if they became the 51st state, the way the electoral college works, we would never vote for a Republican again. Like, I mean, at least not in the conceivable future. Like that would swing every vote towards the Democrats.
Like, I feel like the Republicans could probably like steal the French nationalists, like maybe figure out a way to like get their vote, but then they would lose everything else, and it doesn't. None of it makes any sense from a perspective of listening to the words that he says. Like his proposed rhetoric doesn't make any logical. Like there's no follow through with what the things that he's saying and the objectives he states that he wants to achieve. And I mean, at first I was just dismissing it because it was like, oh, Trump's being Trump. He's going to like make some sort of massive proclamation of what he wants. He's going to get some sort of like token concession, and then he's going to crow about that and say he won, and then that's going to be the end of it. And he's going to like sour our relationship with our international allies in exchange for some like probably something that was already going to be happening under the Biden administration, but he's going to claim that was his victory. Sure. Like whatever, that's typical Trump behavior.
Yeah.
But this has gone on far too long. Like this is no longer bluster. This is like an intentional, deliberate sabotage of our relationship. And to what end? Like why specifically Canada? Why not, like, if you're going to do something like this, as dogmatic as they are, why not like Mexico or something like that? Like why is it Canada?
And I have to imagine it's just because like Trudeau and stuff, right? Like he just doesn't like him.
Well, he doesn't like the Mexican president is female, and like of course he has to do that too. Like he's female, like a Ferengi or some shit,
yeah.
And like it. I don't know what this.
Yeah, it's wild. And Bray mentions here the plane designed to be an airborne war, airborne war room during a nuclear war got a 3-hour maintenance run yesterday. Nothing to worry about. Like he's just doing things that gear up to make it look like he's going to do this. Now, if it's just talk, well, first of all, it's already progressed to the point of just talk. We're doing with
The tariffs have already unleashed at
Right.
this point, and I don't think, unless you've been like actively following it and you know how bad it is, you probably don't know how bad it is, because holy shit, it's so much worse than you like. Even if Trump would at this point was like, haha, just kidding, takes these backsies, so much has happened at this point
right.
that can't be undone. Like, so many trade deals have been unraveled.
Right.
Canada and the US have taken so many actions at this point to completely destroy the industries of the other opposing state that, like,
Sure.
even if Trump like said, haha, just kidding, at this point, it's too late.
Yeah, I
So
mean, if
much-
I'm going to build an international pipeline that goes between my nation, your nation, and all of a sudden your nation has a big old hiccup, and it's like, even if I get approval to go ahead, I'm like, well, I assumed that this was just going to happen. What do the investors do? They're going to withdraw, right? Like, they're like, oh, well, this actually might not happen. So now I've got less funding for these projects. Okay, less funding for these projects means less trade, right? Like, so
Yeah.
even if, like, first of all, the tariffs have already gone through, but even if the tariffs didn't go through, simply the threat of this, like, it's like, as you mentioned already, Aaron, it's untold damage. Like, it's bad, and it's going to prevent the types of relationships and business that we would have done in the future, even if nothing else happens, even if it's dead silent going forward. It's a really stupid thing to do. Let's see here. Why choose the ally that caused half the articles in the Geneva Convention? Why pick a fight with Snow, Florida? Friends with Putin, enemies with Trudeau. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. It's awful. I wish I had more, like, I wish I had something more insightful for you, Aaron, because normally I see political maneuvering and I understand it for what it is. Like, he's trying to do this. I truly just believe he wants to be remembered as being a strong man. This is his legacy. He's close to death. And I think he wants to be remembered as being like the strong man. And so when people think about him, they'd be like, oh yeah, he would have blown up Canada if they didn't give him what he wants. That's the best I can do, because I truly don't see any point in it.
It
like,
seems hyperbolic to say, and it all seems like too easy of an answer, but like, what better way to destroy the country and destroy our international alliances and everything like that for Putin's benefit than to yell America first over and over again as you do things that are obviously harmful to American interests? Like, was the, when fascism comes to the country, it'll be wrapped in a, carrying the Bible and wrapped in the American flag or whatever. I don't remember that phrase or whatever, but like, overly symbolic expressions while doing things that are deliberately harmful to American interests. And like, I don't care what sort of perspective that you have on an issue, torpedoing our relationship with Canada doesn't serve our interest at all. Like, anyone's interests. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Torpedoing, I mean, America's on thin ice with a lot of nations, as is. We have existed on coercive relationships with a lot of our friends, quote unquote, for a long time. Canada's one of the few we didn't have to do that with. And now we are putting them into that camp. I don't know if the State Department just finds it easier, like, to classify all nations as our allies as people that we've coerced into being our allies, as opposed to just having like good relations.
Well, and the worst part is like, going forward, even if we somehow manage to like avert disaster, we don't go to war, we elect a Democrat to be the ratchet to the clank or whatever for another 4 years or whatever, and we go back to normal relations, every other country on the planet knows at this point that they can't trust the United States.
Sure.
They're gonna, if they elect another madman in 4 years, then there's no guarantees that anything can be done with America on a long-term time scale, because they can't guarantee that the United States won't elect another madman.
Sure. I mean, coincidentally, this is the administration where what Doge tried to pull the funding on work that was already done, tried to stop the payment for that work that was already done. Judges overruled it and said, in fact, the Supreme Court overruled it and was like, no, you have to pay for work that is already done to get done. But
yeah, it's like he's trying
that's the stage that we're at now.
The Trump idea of not paying contractors after they've done labor for him. You know, it's like,
yeah. This is, I mean, he shouldn't have been getting away with it beforehand, right? Like, but now, like, the fact that he's trying to get away with it in politics too is ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, I think the Christian takeaway is what you said. When we look out for these things, it's the stuff that's wrapped in Christianity that deserves an extra skeptical eye. We're told that's where the Antichrist is coming from, not from without, but from within. We're told that those are the wolves in sheep's clothing. Like, these are the people that can do real damage to us, right? Like, are the people that are extra super duper Christian and American.
You put me on Paula White because she flew completely under my radar because I've never paid attention to the White House official pastors. You know, I always just assume that they're like this milquetoast non-entity that, you know, and you're like, no, you should probably pay attention to her. She is crazy with a capital C, you know, like, and evil, you know, like, it's not just your standard like Obama pastor or whatever, you know.
She's crazy with 3 capital K's. It's a brand new faith office. Like, if it was just like a chaplain, I'd be like, sure, like, have your crazy chaplain that you feel like having. But yeah, this is somebody who actually has like power, is being given power in this country to dictate what qualifies as a faith and what doesn't, and how to navigate matters between faith and politics. And we've entrusted it to somebody who's frankly unqualified to, I mean, I wouldn't trust her to watch my kids, right? Like, this is somebody who is completely out of it. I mean, it's funny because even from like a conservative angle, like, just all her affairs alone, like, you think would just be like, oh, like, she cheats and gets people to cheat. Like,
Republicans don't care about that at all anymore, unless they can use it as a rhetorical attack on Democrats.
I wouldn't care about it, but she professes to be a Christian, and she also has said like if you even question like that we weren't having it, like that there was an affair, like, you're like, Satan's got a hold of you or something like that, before like admitting, like, and then finally admitting to the affair, and then acting like we're just really judgmental for not being able to forgive her. It's like, well, you told me I was like in Satan's grasp for believing you had the affair. I don't know. Aaron, anything you want to say before we call it a night?
No, I hope that we'll have another group next week, and that we're not at war with Canada by then.
I can join you in that one. Let's hope we're hope for not war with Canada. But everybody, thanks so much for joining us again. A lot of viewers, a lot of people watching. Got more viewers as time went on, which is always something that I look for to make sure we're doing good. Aaron, thanks as always for joining. I'll see you in book club tomorrow. But to everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day.
Good night, everybody.